we can learn from this and do some sharebacks and things like that. But with that, I welcome all of us, and I will invite both Aijen and Jessica just to, in a handful of minutes, share, just kind of ground us in your work and also in the landscape of care as we know it now in the United States.
You want me to go first, Jessica, or you want to go first?
Sure, go for it.
Okay. Well, I'm really excited to be on this huddle. Thank you so much to Brittany for pulling it together. And I've been looking for an excuse to be in something with Jessica for a long time. So this is a really great opportunity for us too. And I think lots will come of it in addition to the learning. And thanks to everyone who's joined. Caregiving is an issue that I've been working on for a long time, for more than 20 years. And I feel like we're kind of on the brink of some kind of a breakthrough. And collectively, all of us who care about this issue. And I think it has to do with a few different things. There's a major demographic shift happening in this country. We more often talk about it in terms of the racial demographic shift, but there's also an incredible generational demographic shift happening with the baby boom generation aging at an incredibly rapid rate of 10,000 people per day turning 65, and people living longer than ever before because of advances in healthcare and technology. So we're about to have the largest older population we've ever had, and people living longer, really much longer than we ever could have imagined when we put our safety net into place. And then on the other end of the generational spectrum, millennials are starting to have families, and at a rate of 4 million babies born per year. So lots of children coming into our world in this country. And so there's this moment where we need more care than ever before, childcare and elder care. And we have less of it because the kind of default infrastructure that we used to rely upon to care for our families, which was women staying home, is really not available to us and hasn't been for a very long time. And for some communities, never really was available. And so we're at this moment where every single person is caring in ways that they probably didn't expect. And we as a society just haven't caught up. We haven't caught up culturally. We haven't caught up in terms of our systems and our policies and our programs. It's creating a ton of pressure on all of our public programs and also on our workforce. You all may be familiar with this term, sandwich generation. We call it the panini effect, where people are squeezed between the pressures of elder care and child care. And so my work has been about really trying to transform our policies, our programs, and our culture to really embrace the caregiving responsibilities of the 21st century and to really support family caregivers as well as the professional caregivers that we're going to need to help us as we work and have families. And so my work with the workforce has been about training and preparing child care workers and home care workers to be a part of the solution, where they can really take pride in the work that they do and support their own families, take care of themselves and their own families doing this work as a profession, which currently is not really possible, given how undervalued this work is. And also through caring across generations to really invest in the ability of families to afford the care that they need. And so we're pushing this big idea called universal family care, which is our companion to people talking about big ideas like universal basic income. Well, we think that in the future, we should all have access to take care of our families as we work. But we're kind of thinking about this as a holistic challenge and opportunity to reinvent our systems to better support how we live in the 21st century, given all of our growing care needs. So maybe I'll leave it there if that's a good start, and see, Jessica, how you want to add.
Yeah, that was so wonderful. That was just great to hear your frame. So thank you. And by the way, I looked at the universal family care stuff that you guys have put together. It is phenomenal. I'm so excited about working with you to be a part of that. So we really occupy a niche within this broad work of caregiving, because at All Our Kin, we focus on a very specific population. We focus on the youngest children and their need for care and families' need for care. And we focus on women who care for children in their homes. So because what we have in this country, I used to call it a broken child care system, but that gives it too much credit. It's really a non-system. What ends up happening is that parents who have very young children, particularly parents who have barriers to accessing care, maybe that's lack of financial resources, transportation barriers, working non-traditional hours, place their infants and toddlers in childcare businesses that are run by women in their neighborhoods. So these women are business people who step up, open their homes to care for the youngest children in the greatest need. These caregivers are so critical. About half of all our children under 3 are in some kind of home-based childcare programs. And yet, in thinking about our caregiving systems, we have tended to ignore and pretend that these caregivers don't exist. And All Our Kin is at a very interesting historical moment in our development for all the reasons Jen describes and a few others. One is that more and more families are not working 9 to 5. They're working non-traditional hours. And so the caregivers who engage with us at All Our Kin, who offer flexibility and support for families who may not work the typical 9 to 5 schedule, are increasingly an important part of our childcare system. The other reason why I think All Our Kin is at an interesting moment, and this is really a little different than all of your work, Jen, is that again, our family childcare providers are caring for the very youngest children. And the brain research is telling us more and more that these children age 0 to 3 are at a critical point in their own development. And so groups like Harvard Center on the Developing Child are producing all this research that is really making folks in systems around health, around education, and around workforce development come to realize that we need to think about where our youngest children are engaged and learning. And as we look at our system, increasingly all the evidence points to the importance of the caregivers with whom we at All Our Kin engage. Now, I think it's really important to set the frame here and say that again, we work with women. We work with primarily low-income women of color who are doing some of the most important work that there is, work around caregiving, work around preparing our youngest children. But what we have seen historically at All Our Kin is that there tends to be a lot of bias, a lot of stereotyping, and a lot of default assumptions about our caregivers, about what they offer and what they are capable of. So one of the conversations that I'm super excited in having is about how we position caregiving differently, but the other is about how we position the conversation about caregivers differently to honor and respect the work that they do and really support their own well-being in all aspects of their daily life. And I know, Jen, this is something you care about enormously, from their earnings to the level of respect they provide to what kind of access they have to resources and support.
Absolutely. That was amazing, and so much alignment in our work. So exciting to hear. And thank you for the work that you've done. I think you've built a model that is absolutely a breakthrough.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I think your work, your framing, the extraordinary work that you've done to really create, I would say, a whole new language, a whole new conversation around the importance of caregiving is what's opened the door for us to do that. So if there are ways that we can build on it and work together, I'm really excited about it. There is one more thing that I'm really interested in flagging too, which is, you know, when we talk about caregivers, we're talking about family caregivers, and then we're talking about professional caregivers. And I think that interaction is so important and interesting to be supporting both groups. And the extent to which, certainly at All Our Kin, we see our caregivers, our family childcare providers, actually playing a critical role in supporting primary caregivers too. But if we had better policies in place, they wouldn't have to go so far above and beyond to support not only children, but also parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we have this, the way our programs are structured, they tend to pit families and the workforce against each other in a kind of zero-sum framework. And the truth is that, as we all know, in real life, caregiving is a full team effort, and everyone's doing it. And certainly in the future, where we're going to need so much care, it's kind of an all hands on deck situation. And family caregivers, even family caregivers who are living far away from their parents and their grandparents that they're caring for, are playing a role, right? Managing care. And so there needs to be a real sense of partnership and teamwork. One of the things we've been doing with Second City, the improv company, is we've been organizing, we've developed a training called Improv for Care, which is right now mainly for family caregivers, but will be also developed for professional caregivers. But it's using some of the tools and methodology of improv to help support caregivers. And one of the things that really strong together. But the idea is that we're each going to bring something different to the table, but every piece is necessary and every piece is valued. And that's the if we can think about caregiving in the future as really an ensemble effort, then we can start to really see the roles that family caregivers play, that the professional workforce is going to play, as not as a zero-sum situation, but as a fundamentally complementary kind of situation. And I think we need to invest in everybody's roles in it. And truly, whether you're a professional or a family caregiver, it's challenging. And you need support, and you need infrastructure, and you need a lot of things. And so I think just looking at how we invest in both roles together, I think is going to be a really important development for how this field evolves.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think one of the wonderful things about working with family childcare providers is the extent to which they do see themselves as partners with families, and often extensions of what may be a frayed family support network, right? So a young mom who doesn't have parents nearby, the family childcare provider may often play kind of almost a grandmother role to her, right? Family childcare providers connect parents and families to all kinds of resources that they might not otherwise have access to. They may prepare a plate for dinner for a mom who works second shift. So, because sometimes that mom won't have time to make dinner. What I struggle with is that in some ways we are burdening our professional caregivers, our family childcare providers, with gap-filling roles that they should not have to play. So in Connecticut, the system that helps low-income families pay for care, this system of vouchers, was closed for over a year. We saw childcare providers go on energy assistance, fall behind on their rent payments rather than turn families away, right? So these burdens that we place on professional caregivers instead of giving them the resources to partner effectively in all cases.
So I'd love to, one thread that's coming out here is talking about or distinguishing the conversation within the conversation of caregiving on the caregiver. And what does it look like? Just, I think acknowledging what I'm hearing is like there is far less support and infrastructure for this profession than other professions. And I'm curious, I'd love to sort of tease out what are the things, like what are the ways to create, what are the levers that you are pushing on most? I would name, I think policy is a big one, as we saw even yesterday, IGEN with the unstoppable convening in Congress, which is advocating for protection and legislation around sexual assault for workplaces 15 or fewer. But anyway, policy is one. I think the cultural narrative is another. But maybe it's one of those two, or maybe it's something I didn't name. But I guess my question would be, and after this we'll see what comes out and what folks listening in might also ask. What are the levers that are really keeping the profession of caregiving and the role of family caregivers? What is keeping us away from having institutional support? And what can be done about it, or what has been done? What are you dreaming up? Seeds of this already planted in your introductions, but as people, I think a lot of people listening in are working in this field or another sort of invisible field. I think fellows as field builders is something we see a lot. So what are the things we should be paying attention to if we want to be giving strength and visibility to this field as a whole?
Well, I think for me, we have a major challenge culturally because this work has historically been associated with women and kind of taken for granted that women will do, and we haven't quite kind of shifted to really recognizing it as real work and valuing it as such. And the truth is a different kind of work than other kinds of work. It's very emotional in nature. It's very intimate. And so there's a way in which it is different. And that difference has actually at times posed a real barrier. Its association with femininity and kind of a natural gender role for women, I think has been a real cultural challenge. And so we have to change culture, and I'll tell you a little bit about how we're doing that. And then I do agree we have to change policy, and there's also a culture around policy that we have to change. And I think that policy related to caregiving has always been seen as very expensive and like there's never enough. And so in this culture of kind of a scarcity, austerity kind of environment, this has kind of fallen away. This will be the first thing that people will say. There's no money. States have no money. The government has no money. And what we've tried to really say in terms of changing the narrative around policy in this field is it really is a question of priorities and values. And we, there are real practical questions around revenue and financing of these programs for sure. But I think that we have to build a public demand and change the story in such a way that it elevates it outside of this scarcity and austerity conversation. And, that's one of the big things that we've been doing at Caring Across Generations, is trying to build what we call a caring majority movement, where we're building a demand among voters and among candidates for office to really champion a new vision and framework for care policy in our country. We have a bunch of care candidates. We're working in 100 state legislative districts in 2018, and we've got dozens of candidates, I think 7 or 8 candidates for governor around the country who've reached out to us wanting to champion a care agenda as part of their economic agenda. So I think we're starting to see how this issue is really rising in the kind of electoral and political conversation, which will help a lot in terms of changing the culture around care policy. And then I think a general kind of popular culture shift needs to happen in our deeply held norms and beliefs around care. And so on that front, we've been really investing in seeding changing the popular culture narrative strategy for about 6 years now. Where we've been trying to generate, inspire content in film and television in the world of entertainment that helps people see themselves as caregivers, as an identity, that helps people see their experiences with caregiving reflected back in mainstream popular culture narratives. We consult on films and television programs like Grace and Frankie and Still Alice, and other shows where we're encouraging showrunners and screenwriters to weave in more stories about caregiving so that it becomes a visible part of American life in a way that people can really see their experiences reflected back, and to really encourage us you can't really value what you can't see, right? And so we're trying to make this visible in a way that we can start a different kind of conversation about what it means to value it from a less kind of overt and conscious way, but really trying to get at the deeply held beliefs and norms that shape what we do value in everyday life. So there's that culture change work that's happening kind of on a slow burn, and then the kind of organizing, constituency building that's happening to try to create a different environment for policy and politics around this issue.
That's great. I feel like I have learned so much from what you have done. It's been a really fascinating learning journey for us, because we began as a direct service organization. Everything that we did was so grassroots. It was about training caregivers to deliver wonderful care and to meet the highest possible standards of quality and create these sustainable businesses. And we thought if we did that, that the work alone would be sufficient. And I think what we've learned is that it's not enough if we don't also begin to think about how we change the conversation. And I listen to you, and I'm so inspired by your intentionality and your thoughtfulness. And one of the things that I've seen over the years in watching your work is that you are both able to bring this wonderful kind of common sense, data-based set of messages, but then you're also appealing to people's empathy, right? And helping people understand that they themselves may well be in the position of providing care or being cared for or imagining what that feels like. And so at All Our Kin, the way that we've translated that directly into our own work is that through the stories and data we've collected, we feel like we've begun to be able to engage with different sectors to make the case then, rather than being a zero-sum game where we pit, for example, our youngest against our oldest, where we pit what we pay our caregivers versus how many children get care versus all these zero-sum traps that we fall into. Rather, we frame this as investment. And some of the places where we've gotten the best traction there, number one, economic development. We've been able to get really strong data showing that by investing in childcare businesses, we're able to generate tangible economic returns. And it was amazing for us after 10 years of doing this work on the ground and talking about the well-being of children and the well-being of families, when we had dollars and cents numbers showing that every dollar we put into these childcare businesses was generating $15 to $20 in short-term economic gains, that really got policymakers' attention in a radically different way. So learning to speak about our work in terms of economic benefits, in terms of benefits for the workforce, so employers obviously as allies. I think another area where we're really engaging is around health and long-term health savings and health benefits of investing in children early on. And the last, which really is specific to the youngest children, rather than the aging population, but really talking about the educational system and connecting our work to K through 12 systems and the extent to which early preparation will make children more successful in school, but also will make it easier for the K through 12 system to do its job. The last piece I want to come back to is just, again, this idea of empathy. That was another huge learning for me in this work. When All Our Kin was just beginning to grow from this tiny, tiny grassroots organization, the first time I had to make a pitch to like a big board of directors at a hedge fund, I was going in with this presentation that was all about children and what children need. And I was lucky enough to be coached by a donor who herself had plenty of means to buy any kind of childcare, but she said to me, go in there and ask those people in that room to imagine what it feels like to walk out the door, leaving your child somewhere you don't feel good about. And I went in and I said that, and it was like everyone in the room, especially the women, but not only the women, sort of went, oh! And they couldn't remember so much what it was like to be a child, but boy, they could imagine what it felt like to be that parent. And so that step of empathy, I think, is really critical to send our message out into the world as well.
Totally. And just building on that, one of the things that we do at the beginning of every meeting at Caring Across Generations is we take 3 minutes, just 3 minutes at the beginning of every meeting, and we ask people to turn to the person sitting next to them and spend a minute sharing a story about someone in their life who's cared for them and the value of that relationship. And just, people start talking about their grandmothers or their mothers or their nannies when they were children kind of growing up, or as somebody, they're usually in the middle of some kind of a care situation, and it just opens up the space for that conversation. And the exchange between two people around this universal experience which is just a human experience, is so connective, and it just creates such a different context for whatever the conversation is in the meeting, and really grounds it in our shared humanity in a way that's incredibly helpful. And I'll say that this moment in our country's history, the more we can talk about caring and empathy, I think the better. And so we do need more spaces, more issues, more programs that put us in a space of empathy and connection and kind of a universal human experience as an antidote to the kind of division and polarity that dominates our media and politics right now. So yeah, I'm so glad you talked about empathy. It's so key. And it's, I think, one of the gifts that our our different initiatives offer the world in this moment.
Thank you, friends. My mind is being blown, but I'm going to keep my facilitator hat on and try to respond emotionally. I am an improviser. And one thing I love about long form improv is, as you were mentioning, and Anne, who is on the call, is working with people experiencing dementia and memory loss, and how tools like improv and art can invite us into a much different conversation about what care looks like. And Connie, our fellow working with the American Association of Caregiving Youth, is here. And just like in the spirit of improv, which for me, long form improv, like the space between all of the raw experiences and thoughts and ideas that each player brings is what makes magical scenes unfold. And so with that, and just in the acknowledgement of that larger web that we're a part of and this larger body of work, I would love to hear from folks who are listening in. There's a way to share your questions in the chat. And Anne and Connie, if you have anything, questions or reactions to pitch in, or also Ai-jen, just whatever's coming up for you, just yeah, the floor is open for questions.
I'd love to hear more about Anne's work with using improv and art with people with dementia. It's something we've thought a lot about, and one of the reasons why we launched this Improv for Care training program was actually the experience of family caregivers for people with Alzheimer's, where the space of just having to say no all the time was really like killing people inside, right? And just the idea that you would say yes and to somebody with dementia who's wandering and wants to do something that you just, just learning how to say yes and in those contexts can be incredibly liberating from what we've observed. So I'd just love to hear more, Anne, about your work, because I think it's so needed and so important.
If I can figure out how to unmute myself. There, I figured that out. Happy to. Thank you guys both for the work that you're doing, and I think what Brittany's responding to, everybody's probably responding to, which is the breadth of the vision and the smartness about the changing of cultural narratives and the hard, long labor of that, and where to invest in that, and then also in the policy piece. I'm full of questions about all those things, but I'll share a little bit about what we're doing. We've really, with Time Slips, have for 25 years, Yes and was the core of everything that we do. And again, very similar to be in a situation where you accept everything that's being given to you and then add to it in a positive way. That's what we say. So that you're meeting the person where they are. I also think a lot of this work is about reorienting this notion, I have to use my hands here, of this beaker mentality about caregiving that we have, which is I'm going to pour all of my care into you and then I'm going to be empty. That we're changing that it's really this, that it's a care partnership, and to reorient that to interdependency and interrelationship, rather in the way that the ensemble that you're talking about, Ai-jen, about that also includes the person who's being cared for. It's not leaving that person out, and that the way to do that is through the intensity of improvisation, which demands that you listen fully and then present and exchange options with each other.
Yeah.
So our core tenets are yes and, ask beautiful questions which open a shared path of discovery, open yourself to wonder and curiosity, and give proof of listening. And those are the 4 core tenets of our work. We're also, where we slip into these beautiful systems you guys have created, I think our unique thing is meaningfulness, that we want to make sure that relationships have are meaningful all the way to the end, regardless of whatever stage or state the person is in, that these relationships can be meaningful for both parties. And we find that that is where the arts come in, because they're a symbolic and emotional language that can bridge cognitive disability, cultural backgrounds, economic disparities, languages, that the arts are really, there's no wrong answer. And so with this act of radical proof of listening, I've been in situations where I've created a story with someone whose language I have no idea what it is. I'm just echoing the person completely with facial gestures and sounds, and sometimes it'll be sounds that aren't words at all, but you can still build meaning making between you through that act. So I think in the intensity of the one-on-one of those relationships and teaching those skills, that's where we are at the micro level, but then also it radiates outward into the immediate ensemble of the care team, the organizational ensembles of care systems, toward the policy changes. That beauty of that improv ensemble metaphor is that it radiates outward from the individual all the way out to the system. So I think, we just offer tons of prompts and for creative engagement in different systems and for individuals. So that's a little synopsis.
So I would love to just say very quickly, I don't want to get us too far off track, but I'm so moved by what you describe, Anne, and it makes me remember and realize how much of a connection there is between our focus on caregiving work with the youngest and yours with the oldest. We haven't talked too much about how All Our Kin does what it does, but one profound way is through coaching caregivers. And that relationship then models the relationship that caregivers hold with children, which is so reciprocal. And one of our coaches' tenets is actually model curiosity and wonder. So when you said that, it just spoke so deeply to my heart, and reaffirms what iGEM was saying about what an incredible opportunity we have in this work to remind the broader society about the primacy of relationships and human connection and play.
Anne, is there a question you want to bring? I have a closeout question because a lot of people want to know what to do next, but we might be able to squeeze one more in.
Go ahead and close out. I can send questions another time. Go ahead.
Okay. So one that has come up in the Q&A in the chat from Tim Shai, and also that we said we'd talk about when we invited a bunch of people to join, is that many people joining are part of whole bodies of people, whether it be organizations or families who are, like, we're all on both sides of caregiving. We've received care, like we've been the person telling the story in the 3 minutes before the meeting about someone who's cared for us, and we're going to probably be in a situation where we're giving care. And I think, how can we, like, what can we do as employers, as members of organizations, as people who live in neighborhoods? In the words of Tim, besides going to the Caring Across Generations Twitter or things of that nature, like, what are things that people can have in mind to educate themselves on this, to see their lives in this frame, and to take action? Yeah, just leave that there.
So in the kind of spirit of Anne's radiating out from our families, I think one is just to make a list of 5 ways that caregiving is happening in your immediate world, and think about what you can do to really value and support that caregiving. Um, and so whether it's supporting your brother who may be playing a bigger role in caring for his kid, or, you're giving your nanny a raise, or, whatever it is, that there are like simple things that you can start to do in your life that really make a difference. And then this is a really important election year, 2018, and we're heading any minute now, the 2020 cycle is going to start, and the issues that will define the elections really matter. And so what we found is just trying to ask the question of, where does care fit into your agenda? Where does childcare? Where does elder care? Where does, how are you thinking about that? What are you proposing as solutions? Really asking that of candidates that you engage with, and really making that something that you talk to other voters in your community about, I think is really, really important. This is something, and I'll just say, the reason why I think this is so important is, like, one of the challenges with caregiving is we culturally see it as a kind of personal responsibility that we just have to figure out on our own in our private realms. And it makes bold public policy really challenging. And so we've got to just take that personal, private conversation into the public arena in as many ways as we can. So those would be 2 kind of things that I would think about, in addition to going to the Caring Across Generations Twitter.
So those are all phenomenal. I would just add a couple. I know that at least some number of us Ashoka Fellows are employers ourselves. And so thinking about how we are engaging with our employees, the extent to which we are creating flexible schedules, creating a climate where people feel comfortable taking the time that they need to support their families, while obviously still making sure that they can do the work that's so important to our mission. I think there's a lot that we can do as employers that we don't always think about ahead of time. I also want to get really specific. There's something called the Child Care and Development Block Grant, which is basically, it's almost the only way that low-income families with infants and toddlers can pay for care. It's a federal grant. It just saw a historically large increase, but we need to make sure the money stays there. So please, any chance you get to sign up for alerts from folks like the National Women's Law Center and support the Child Care and Development Block Grant, please, please do that. And interacting with your own professional caregivers, again, just take time to honor and lift up their work, both in how you interact with them and how you pay them to the best of your ability.
That's so great, Jessica. Your comment just reminded me to just name that we actually have active campaigns in 13 states to try to move some version of universal elder care or universal family care. And right now, we actually, in the state of Maine, we just handed in 70,000 some petition signatures to put home care for all on the ballot. So in November, voters in Maine will be voting on whether to make home care available to everyone, regardless of income, based off of need. So it's in terms of actual care needs. So it's a really big breakthrough in this idea of a 21st century care infrastructure that we're really excited about. If you live in Maine or know people in Maine, tell them to watch out for it and support that ballot initiative. In the state of Washington, there's a bill called the Long-Term Care Trust Act that people will be voting on in the next legislative session. And it's also another breakthrough bill that would create a social insurance fund for long-term care in the state of Washington. It would make Washington a real model in terms of both the workforce for elder care and also the way that the system is resourced. So those are two examples of places where there's policy that can really revolutionize at least the elder care side. And we need more support on the child care side. So definitely the Child Care Development Block Grant is key. And we need to be thinking about what more we want to ask of our elected officials and our policymakers going forward.
Thank you, friends. Yeah, that's really helpful. And both of your Twitters still stand as excellent resources as well. We have one question from the Q&A around how do we make sure that policies for caregivers don't actually end up overburdening policy? So I think there's a larger question in there too of like, what does good policy design look like for a field that we're trying to make visible? Yeah, what does good policy design look like in this case?
I think that's a great question, and something that we're obsessed with. We've been working with a group of people who used to be at the U.S. Digital Service during the Obama administration, when he recruited a bunch of technologists and engineers and designers from Silicon Valley to work and to be embedded in different departments within the U.S. government. And those folks are, many of them are associated now with New America, and they're working on actually applying some of the lessons of that work, of applying tools from the Valley into public policy design. They're actually looking at new ways of designing for the user experience of public policy, especially social programs like care programs, from the beginning, from the actual outset of policy design. And so we've been working with them around how we're conceptualizing universal family care in a way that actually tries to streamline some of the very complicated, very challenging ways that these programs work, but also kind of thinking about it from, usually we design policy and then we think in the regulatory process around how it's all going to work and get implemented. And they're trying to think about the implementation and the user experience from the front end. And so we're looking at universal family care as almost a test case for how we might do that, assuming or kind of prefiguring that we'll get there at some point. And we're trying to model a new way of policy design that actually tries to improve how these things actually work for people. I think to address your concern. So we're in the very early stages of what that looks like, but I think it's very much a concern that these programs are outdated, the way that they work is outdated, and they were never really that great in terms of user experience to begin with. So yeah, there's a lot to dig into there for sure.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I would add, iGen spoke near the beginning of this conversation about the zero-sum game where parents are pitted against professional caregivers, or family caregivers are pitted against professional caregivers. I think in looking at any potential policy, one question to ask is the extent to which it supports all the parties involved. So in my field, working with children, does this policy work for children? Does it work for their family members? And does it work for the child care providers themselves? I think we have seen in some cases a tendency to create policies that sort of push down on or place expectations on child care providers without giving them the resources to actually meet those demands. So to think about policies that are thoughtful of and engage everyone, both what those policies say and the process that we use in creating them. How are we actually getting the voice of all those who are going to be affected by the policy? The other piece to iGen's point about implementation, I think it's critical that we engage with administrators and with the folks who are actually going to be implementing policies on the ground, because we have seen, in some cases, places where you have regulations that could support really wonderful outcomes, but if the folks who are implementing them don't respect the caregivers, for example, for whom those policies are designed, they're going to implement them in ways that don't making the rules, but those enforcing the rules actually think about caregivers and caregiving is important.
Yes. Yes. I wonder, I'm thinking of what you shared. I don't know if it was Anne or Ijen or no, it was Jessica responding to Anne and Ijen of just like always moving forward. Ijen, thank you for sharing Hand in Hand, this resource. Claire Fallender also shared it in the Q&A, and I was like, let's try to get it in the chat because people might not see it. So you and Claire, our colleagues here, are well aligned. I'm curious, Jessica, you shared this, like the key tenet of curiosity and wonder. And I'm really cognizant of, we've invited a bunch of people to hear all of your amazing answers. And I actually wonder if you might close us in sharing a question or a curiosity that you're holding in this work that you're doing.
Well, Connie actually lifted up this point in the chat, but I'm really wanting to hear more and learn more from youth caregivers. Our young people are playing more of a role than ever before in caring for our older generations, and they have so little support and so little visibility, and they're doing it oftentimes while they're in school. And it's just incredible pressure. So it's a kind of a different version of the sandwich gen pressure. It's not about work and family, but it's about school and family, and sometimes school and work and family. And so, yeah, I want to hear more and learn more about that experience and actually try to figure out what it would look like to really uplift. I'm curious about how we support and uplift our youth caregivers.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I'm, I was super excited for this conversation because one big question that I have is how we at All Our Kin can better align what we're doing to support the incredible work that Ijen and her team do, and that we can build even more on their own messaging to really create an incredibly powerful coalition around caregiving at every age. And so I'm excited for this to be the first part of a longer conversation, and I hope Anne and Connie and many of those listening in on the call can be part of that too.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, friends who are joining in, and thank you, Jessica and Ijen, especially for just being so generous with your own stories and what magic lies between these two bodies of work. It's really exciting and such a needed reframe for the world we're trying to build. So I will follow up with folks who joined with this recording, and we'll try to, from this scroll of insights, simmer it down to distill it into a few top insights and highlights from the conversation that are shareable and can help keep this much larger conversation moving forward. So thank you for being our learning partners.
Thank you all. Thanks for joining and for everything you're doing out there.
Yeah, thank you so much.